Are you ready, Nicole?
Yes, we are ready.
Okay, I've just pulled up the chat and there was one question. Are Buy America requirements expected if no federal funding for utilities? The answer to that is yes. If it's a Buy America, basically iron and steel, what it applies to, and there's a threshold. It's like I have to look it up. I'm sorry, I don't recall off the top of my head what it is. Like 1% of the contract, or if it's at a minimum. So the answer is that you have to meet Buy America requirements. And at first, utility companies were a little reluctant, but they said, "Hey, we got stuff," and they've turned around. So, and you cannot think you can bypass Buy American by saying, "Oh, it's just non-participating." The answer to that is if it's in the contract, whether it's participating or not, iron and steel must meet Buy America requirements. So there are ways, like I said, ways around it. If you have utility relocations, don't put the utility relocations as part of the contract. It's a separate contract to be done after the fact, or in some cases before, if the utility, that. So there are ways around it, but most cases, like I said, utility companies are on board, and therefore the ability, needing to meet Buy America requirements with utility companies are not an issue. Okay, all right. We typically in the classroom setting, this works a little bit differently. So we're going to be going through things on a step-by-step basis of how to go through an authorization, in this case, a PE. Tomorrow, we're going to do a construction. Oops. Something just popped up in chat, and I'm just going to take a quick look. Oh, thank you. You're welcome. So, we have a simple scenario. You have a project. Your agency has programmed federally funded project in the FTIP for PE and construction phases to rehabilitate D Street from East North Avenue to East College. So it kind of shows you location of this on a map. So in terms of the RFA package, we're doing PE. This is what we expect you to deliver to Caltrans district engineer. Oops, what happened? I'm sorry, people, did it again. When you have a keyboard,
Peter, I have a trick for this. If you right click on the PowerPoint, and then you can select the slide you'd like to go jump to.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just, I got crazy fingers, and the keys I want to hit are right next to each other, and I just will one too high. Okay, so assign this federally funded road rehab project. It's programmed in the FTIP for both PE construction, and you're going to provide documents for the PE provided the following documents in the package. You have a field review, FTIP, and a classification map. We're going to complete the request for authorization, the LAPM 3A, in this case, as a group, but basically by me. I will pause and so field review form, standard information. And one of the key things about the field review form and everything is ensuring that there's consistency. I emphasize this, consistency in terms of the project description and limits, that these meet everything in terms of where it's defined in the FTIP versus field review. Because theoretically, not theoretically, our requirements prior to the field review is PES, which is the Environmental documentation you fill out before you think that document is required to have the FTIP description in it. So the FTIP description should carry forward through all these documentation to ensure that we are authorizing what was programmed. So emphasize consistency between these documentation regards to this work. So you can see the project limits are on D Street from East North to East College. It's pavement rehab. So functional classification. Yeah, we got to find out what the functional classification is. So we go to a CRS maps. This is a shot here. Shows here is our facility. And if I asked you right off the bat, what's that classification? You're going to look at the color guide and you're going to see it's a major collector. And so it goes to major collector. Is it on the federal aid system? Obviously, the field review defines it as being on the federal aid system. And some kind of areas get involved with, it's like, is this a POTI? Well, no, it's not. The Caltrans encroachment. Is this any way, shape, or form touching a state facility? No. And is it state only funded? No, we're using federal funds. So cost estimate breakdown for this project, just these are things you would develop to kind of have an estimate. What, in this case, you're showing that you're going to be using federal funds for both environmental design and for construction engineering. You have an estimate. These are things that are, are going on all the time. They're going to be updated periodically. I mean, early in the process, these are going to be really rough numbers. They're not going to be exact, but they should help tie into with what's programmed in the FTIP. That's one of the key things here. These numbers should be very close to what's programmed in the FTIP. So project can be administration. The agency is going to be doing the design, environmental themselves. Construction engineering, yes. Construction, of course, is going to be done contracted out. So it's consultant. It's what it really means. And then, of course, the maintenance of the project agency. And here's project managers, concurrence. Always have lots of signatures. Lots of signatures in these documentations. So you're looking for that. And then, of course, Caltrans representative. In some cases, you might have an FHWA representative when you get into the projects of significance, the POTIs. So here's our FTIP. Mentioned that this is one of these documents a little bit out of date because we're still dealing with the 2018. And so if you look at this project, we're currently in the 2021 fiscal year. This funding for some of the funding showing up in the 2018. So it's still part of the FTIP. So in theory, you would be asking for that EPSP to get, because we have a delay, but bear with me that we're just referencing these things. So funding is in the we have funding in the FTIP, and you'll see that PE funds are programmed, and we have also local funds. So we're going to now start going through the process of filling out this form. So the date is just a pull down calendar. Federal project number, that will be a number that will be supplied to you from the Caltrans district area engine, the DLA. So they'll give you a federal project number. The alpha prefix ties in with the funding code. We know, mentioned earlier from the previous thing, that we have STP funds on this, a block grant. So we get an STPL prefix. The first 4-digit number is what we call a low code. Every agency has a low code. It's just each unique for your agency. The parens number, in this case, the 86, is just a numerical sequence of projects that have been developed for that agency. So we have a system called LP2000, and that's how our numbers are generated from. So if we came through the next project on this, it would generate an 87. That's all. But every project has a unique federal project number. So the agency, city or county, put your information. Caltrans district, it's a pull-down menu. So in this case, we chose District 5. And a congressional district, when you select Caltrans District 5, the congressional districts are restricted to congressional districts within that Caltrans district. And the CRS maps can help you identify exactly which congressional district. And I usually get asked this question, why is that important? And I'm going to tell you that someplace, somewhere, some congressional person wants to know what transportation projects are occurring in their district. And by having this information, we can pull it out and somebody can run a report someplace and say, hey, Congressman, Congresswoman, you have this projects that are going on in your district. And this is what's been funded recently. So just chose 24. Contact, we want to name person, who the person is. Project manager, involved with the project, their title. I got an email, and of course a phone number. You just enter the number in, and it automatically converts it into a phone format, so you don't have to even worry about the formatting of it. Just type in the number. Project title, same thing, should be consistent. Title is not so critical, but everyone has a reference to a project as a title. Location, description of work. Once again, consistency between the FTIP and what you're requesting. And then, of course, the functional classification is a drawdown. We identified it as a major collector. And again, the CRS map. Is it located on the state highway system? That's a checkbox. In this case, no. At risk? No. It's not an ITS. Those are get into your tech projects. Some of the ones I've seen that are a high risk ITS as you get into some of the high occupancy toll lane type projects that are occurring like in the San Francisco Bay Area. But that's not applicable. Project oversight. Who's doing the work? Is it locally administered? PODES, once again. In this case, it's a pretty straightforward project. It's a locally administered project. Project end date. I've never talked about this being as important as it is now before. This has become a very, very important piece of information. FHWA has truly defined that the project end date is when all invoicing has to have occurred for a particular project. Cannot do work beyond a project end date is not federally eligible. And they're also saying now that you have to have the invoices done before the project end date. So we usually refer to it as agreement end date. And we talk about period of performance. This is one of these things that FHWA is now doing, performance measures. So what's the period of performance? It starts with the initial federal authorization. That's the beginning. It ends with the project end date. And no reimbursable costs may occur after the project end date. There's really no invoicing can occur. Invoicing is to be done before project end date. We establish it with their initial authorization, and then we update it with subsequent authorizations. So we do not, when we do a PE authorization, we're not asking for the project end date of when the project's going to be completed. We're asking for that phase of work, and then the next phase will add on to it. So you do have the ability to update the project end dates. I think I'm going to finish this project end date, and we'll come back and I'm going to check chat because I'm sure this is generating some questions. So the completion of PE right away. This is how we kind of go about estimating what the end date would be. So for when we're doing the PE and right of way, we estimate it as the anticipated advertising date. Okay. And if we're doing construction, construction is estimated as when the board or council acceptance of the contract completion. So those are how we establish it. And then what we do is we add 12 months to those dates to allow for that unforeseen conditions that happen. You know, there's a delay or something like that that occurs. So, oops, adding 12 months. So, project end date for this project, you know, these are kind of estimates. In this case, we had a construction federal fiscal year was 2 years out. We estimated the, like I said, granted, these are a little bit off of today's dates, but we estimated the advertisement date was going to be March of 2021. So the project end date would be 3/11/22. And there's a pull down menu. You put that 3/11, it automatically adds the 12 months. I'm going to pause for a moment and check chat to see if there's any questions in chat. I don't see any questions. Okay, so let's see what's happening here. So, okay, so the end date, and then we're going to go into what's the federal fund amount to be requested. And this will be generated automatically through the funding section. And one of the first things to ask for is pro rata or lump sum. FHWA, another thing, requires for a reimbursement type to be established at the time of authorization, pro rata or lump sum. Pro rata dictates that whatever reimbursement ratio you have, that reimbursement ratio will be retained. Lump sum basically says if you're got X number of dollars, we're basically going to hold that federal dollar amount, and whether the reimbursement rate goes up or down, we'll hold that reimbursement amount. Cannot exceed the federal reimbursement share. But, you know, and here's kind of the rule of thumb. If you are fully funded, meaning that you are at the maximum federal reimbursement rate, if in this case 88.53%, pro rata is your preferred choice. If you're underfunded, meaning your reimbursement rate is less than the federal maximum of in this case 88.53, say you're down at 75%. Lump sum is your preferred choice. And I'll explain here why. If you're at pro rata in 88.53, if the cost of the project goes up and you're able to add funds to it, you'll retain that 88.53%. Costs go down, same thing. You will always be reimbursed the maximum amount of funds. If you are underfunded and program is lump sum, so you're at, say, 75%. You know, if costs go up, you're going to have to cover those costs with your own dollar no matter what. But if the costs go down, you have savings. you will have the initial dollar of savings will be 100% local funds until you reach down to the costs were to go down to a point where the total federal funds hit the 88.53% or the maximum federal reimbursement, and then it would be held at that. So if you're a lump sum and you, or say you're underfunded and you chose pro rata, say at 75%, costs go down, guess what? For every dollar saved, you only get 25 cents, federal gets 75%. But if you're a lump sum, that initial dollar of savings would be 100% local funds. I hope that kind of helps in choosing which of these you do. So things got a little bit out of hand here. So project funding, we're doing the PE phase. We're doing PE. Why is that not going away? Something got an error here in the PowerPoint. I'm sorry, that pro rata should have gone away. So you got your block grant funds. Yeah, geez, I'm sorry, I can't get rid of that pro rata lump sum there because I know I missed that, some error in the PowerPoint. I'm sorry. So the funding, can't see the funding, but you show that there was funding of 45,000. Federal total cost was 62%. In this case, this project 72.58% reimbursement rate. That would be automatically calculated. You can see the lump sum was chosen. Toll credits, no, and there. Okay, there's that pro rata is gone. I'm sorry. So you'll see that 62,000 was the total cost. Federal participating 100%, 62,000. 45,000 of federal funds, 17,000 of local funds. And like I said, give you a reimbursement, and since it's under the maximum reimbursement ratio for STP of 88.53, it was wisely chosen to be lump sum. And you see that this federal amount requested, 45,000, is automatically populated based off of the project funding. So once this form is filled out, you'll see that on the second page of this form, it gives you the required supporting documentation that you need to submit with your package. In this case, it has the FTIP. If you have CMAQ, you must submit CMAQ benefit calculations. In some cases, there's a few MPOs out there that CMAQ information is actually included on the FTIP page. If not, it's a separate document. Again, if by any chance you're using consultants that you're not going through the normal consultant selection process, you may have to submit a PIF. And of course, your DBE information needs to be updated. So you may have, it may be your first project of the federal fiscal year, and you'll need to make sure your DBE is submitted for that first project. Projects after that would be already accepted. Responsible charge certification is required. Certifying, one of the many times we are having a full-time employee in charge. Oops. Went too fast. So you'll have to make sure we have a person of contact. Any comments you want to put in the remarks? So, authorization flaws. Incorrect FTIP information or not programmed. That's not enough programmed, wrong fund type, wrong phase program, fiscal year where you had no EPS approved, or it's outside that 4-year FTIP window. DBE, you don't have your 9A, 9B on file. ADA compliance, not on file. And I mentioned earlier, not using the current forms. You could reject this project that I just submitted because it's not using the most current forms. It does not have the at-risk PE information. So I'll let you know. The form I'm using is not even the most current form. So I'm going to pause. Are there any questions? No questions. Okay. So environmental and field review. Environmental procedures, like I said, is a planning activity. Its job is to evaluate the natural and human settings. It involves public input from hearings and meetings. It is required by laws, both NEPA and CEQA. CEQA is the state. CEQA is approved by the locals. NEPA is approved by Caltrans. And I see, it looks like we got something popped up in chat. Question, do you say these forms need to be completed for each portion of the project? Each phase of the work, yes. You will be submitting a 3A for each phase of work, and you will incorporate previous approved information on the form as you do it. So tomorrow we will look at basically doing the construction authorization for this project, and you'll see how the PE information is carried into it. So, all right. So, like I said, CEQA is a locally approved, NEPA is Caltrans approved. There is one unique thing about CEQA, and that is if you're dealing with the CTC and that you are seeking allocation of funds through the CTC. Overall, the state has no approval authority in CEQA. The CTC does have a requirement for CEQA documents that are negative DEX or higher, that you need to submit a copy of your CEQA document to the CTC prior to an allocation of like PS&E right-of-way or construction. And they call it, they do what's called an e-resolution, which is approval for future consideration of funding. And you will not include, this will be submitted directly from the local agency to the CTC. Does the MPO need to authorize Epsp? And the answer to that is yes. If you're dealing with state-funded projects or state-approved programs like the HSIP safety or the bridge program, those individual programs need to approve Epsp. Typically, for the safety, your DLAE may submit the request on your behalf. For the bridge, they'll need to make sure that the bridge database, which is managed, that is updated there. And so your district engineer should help you in that regards, obtaining it. Okay. So the preliminary environmental studies, I said the PES form, examines the project effect on the environment, considers alternatives, determines needed studies, and determines the probable document, what type of environmental document is going to be required. This is kind of just an example of the PES, the LAPM 6A. I didn't mention this to you people in the past, but you'll notice in this case on the lower left-hand corner, it says handouts, figures 19 through 30. In the packet of materials, there is a handout section, and this references the pages that are associated with that. So you have the handout information. You can go and you'll see a full copy of the PES there. And this is the PES form currently submitted with the field request form. I believe they are done at the same time. So environmental timing. Like I said, environmental approval has to occur before final design right-of-way construction, and these kind of are just estimates only. So if it's a category exclusion, a CE with studies, it takes you 6 months to 2 years. Environmental assessment, FONSI, 2 to 3 years. Section 106, cultural historical, 1 month. EIS, 3 to 4 years. You know, like you said, start today. And as I said, mentioned, part of this whole series is an environmental course, and same thing like the right-of-way, environmental. I'm not sure when it's going to be scheduled, but highly recommend, if you want to get involved with this, to attend the environmental course. I see Nicole just sent out the handouts. So the field review, it is, you know, a kind of a scoping document. We've, you know, brief project report and focus on, you know, focus with the federal regulation. Field review form is required for E76, typically the first few pages. There are formal versus informal. Under this day and age of COVID, I assume there's not too many formal field reviews. Most everything's being done with electronically. And formal reviews, I don't know exactly how they're being handled, but for some of the emergency relief and for significant NHS projects. So, like I said, how they're being handled in this day and age, I do not know for exactly, but I assume similar to a Zoom process of getting people all in the same room to discuss a particular project. As I mentioned, here's the field review form we kind of went through earlier with our D Street project. Ready for another quiz? Before we do that, let's take a look at chat. See something pop up on chat. Do the local assistance forms and process somewhat mirror the in-house CT process? The answer to that is kind of yes. It's kind of I'm not quite sure where that question's coming, you know, exactly what they're looking for. But the answer to that is yes, that our process ensuring that things are followed and procedures, and that when we do reviews and stuff, that we make sure that all the documentation's in place accordingly. And it's, could you describe the most efficient way an agency can plan a project? When is the best time to develop the Psne? Ooh. Development of the Psne kind of gets into when can you construct? You know, do you have construction windows? You know, California is a very broad state, and you know, certain areas have construction windows. You know, you go up in the mountains where you have snow. Northern California, we got rain. Southern California areas are a little bit drier. So you kind of want to look to see, you know, where do I need to meet? Where do I need to get my construction in place to meet a construction window? You know, if you have, like, we have a bridge that's in an environment that, you know, where you can't build it all in one construction season because of, say, rain and high water, that you have to stage it in certain ways. So you kind of want to almost work it backwards to say, okay, this is when I can construct. So this is how long it's going to take me to do all the preliminary engineering work. So when's the best time to develop the Psne is when's the best time to construct the project. Okay, let's pull up the, Nicole, can you bring up the quiz? What must you do before you advertise? Well, in most cases, yes, you need to do all of those, but the key fact is that you need to get the authorization. Yes, you're going to estimate the cost, you're going to submit E76 to the district, but you have to have that authorization in place. That emphasis, authorize before you advertise. Next question. Oh, I didn't really mention this. So this question is kind of an unfair question, but toll credits need to be identified in the FTIP. And my apologies, I did not answer this question, but I am seeing that you guys are really, really smart because you're answering correctly. And I'll end it there. The answer is true, and 90% of you knew that. So, like I said, the answer is yes, they'll be identified in some way. It varies how they're identified. You don't have to necessarily identify the exact dollars. Each MPO is a little bit different in how they identify toll credits, but they do need to state that there is toll credits being applied somewhere in the FTIP. Next question. NEPA approval is equivalent to CEQA approval. I'll end it there. And the answer is false. NEPA is the federal environmental document, and it's approved by Caltrans. CEQA is a state document, and it's approved by the local agency. And go to the next question. All federal regulations must be followed in all phases of work, even if there is federal funding in only one phase. I lost my slide. Okay, and the answer is true. One of the key things here is that if you're not utilizing federal funds for any environmental work, you're going to use federal funds totally for construction, you still have to meet NEPA. You still have to do some right-of-way requirements. So if there's $1 of federal funds on a project, NEPA is going to be required, for example. Buy America has to be met. So it doesn't matter which phase the federal funds are in. Those are two examples that, and then like I said, in the Uniform Relocation Act under right-of-way also. Those three items are required to be met, even if there is just $1 of federal funds. Next question. No invoicing may be occurred after this date. And it is the project end date. Absolutely. So project end date. That's the end of the questions there. I'm going to take a quick look at the chat, see if we have anything there. When we complete the RFA, would the amount of toll credits be entered on the form? No, the toll credits would not be entered as a separate dollar amount. It would be included in the total federal funds on the 3A. And even if the only federalized environmental phase and everything else is local, is the whole project federalized? You've met, like I said, you've met the requirements in terms of course, doing a NEPA. But when it comes to construction, you do not need to follow the federal procedures in that case. You can use your own local procedures in constructing the project. So you're okay in that regards. Like I said, there's three criteria that you absolutely have to follow: NEPA, Buy America, and the Uniform Relocation Act for right-of-way. So those three requirements have to be fulfilled no matter what. Everything else, like I said, depending on the phase. So if you're not using federal funds for some preliminary engineering, you can hire consultants to do certain items as long as you're not seeking federal reimbursement. So if the project already had an approved PES, but before going to RFA for construction, the project scope and design changed, does the agency need to prepare a new PES or just explain everything changed in the NEPA revalidation form? I think the answer to that is yes, the NEPA revalidation would cover all the changes that need to be made. So I think that you kind of answered the question yourself. NEPA would need to be revalidated. I want to say I'm not an environmental expert, but I've always asked this question of our environmental specialists, et cetera. And, you know, like, does a CE have an expiration date? And they always tell me, no, it does not. But you need to consider revalidating no matter what, whenever you go to the next phase of work. So you may have done, like I said, you've done your environmental, your NEPA, and you started design, and then you go to construction. It could be a year, maybe less. It doesn't have to be, but it has to be considered. Has something potentially changed in the environment to revalidate? In most cases, the revalidation doesn't take too long. It can be turned around, but it should be considered. So, Nicole, you can take away the questions. I got one more. I think I'm going to go through one more section here. Yeah. Nicole, we're probably going to get done a little early today, but I'll hang on after we get done here and answer any questions that people might have. So can we turn the poll questions off?
Yes, just exit.
Yeah, I did. I forgot I can do that. Okay, let's go. So right-of-way utilities. Once again, right-of-way has its own course during the for the federal aid series, but we kind of scratched the surface with this. So right-of-way authorization, you preliminary right-of-way can be reimbursed under the PE phase. So you can do something. Right-of-way planning studies and preliminary appraisals. If you go into acquisition utilities, that has to be programmed and reimbursed under an E76 for right-of-way after NEPA approval. And then, of course, the appraisals, acquisition functions, and you have to have the authorization before first written offer. Funding eligibility, the FTIP must match the E76 request. There are, like I said, four types of right-of-way certs: Cert 1, 2, 3, and a 3W, which is a kind of workaround. So key thing on this is that a Cert 3 must be elevated to a Cert 2 or a Cert 1 before bid opening. So we will typically put a condition on your E76 that says, hey, you have to have this done before you open your bids. And a workaround, like I said, it's the same thing, does not have that requirement. We have two different forms, a short form and a long form, the LAPM 13A, 13B. 13A dictates this is what you can use it for. If there is no right-of-way required, you're not purchasing any parcel property whatsoever. It's off the state highway system. Except no right-of-way acquisition, no relocation or railroads, no utilities other than cover adjustments. So you can do a utility, a manhole lift would be classified as a cover adjustment. So the short form can be used. The 13B is, yes, right-of-way is required. It's still off the state highway system because these forms only apply to off the state highway system. If it's on the state highway system, there is a state form that is required. Right-of-way action necessary, such as you've got easements, rights of entry, or acquisitions. One of those items is part of it. Liability, if you got utilities involved, determination of liability. Who's responsible for the utility? So utility relocation costs are eligible only if necessary for construction. The agency is legally responsible for the costs. I kind of always define it like this. If the utility and the facility are owned by the same entity, then it's possibly eligible for federal reimbursement. But the key is you still need to go through the right-of-way process. So you need to identify any utility conflicts early in the design. And then this is a case where we refer to the Caltrans right-of-way manual for projects on the state highway system. So, and then the E76 is processed if the agency is liable for the cost in this. So you can get the right-of-way. Oops. So in terms of authorization, utility procedures, they need to map and make sure conflict, develop the plans, like I said, determine the liability, notify the owner, and you want to make sure we list and list all the utilities and relocate, manage the work, and then it's LAPM 14H. So federal reimbursement of the E76 for utility relocation is typically done under the right-of-way, but it can be done during construction. And that is such that if you want to make that utility relocation work part of the construction contract, it's allowable. There's no right or wrong. It depends on the utility company and whether they're willing to let somebody relocate a component of theirs. So the utility covers typically are not controversial, and the utility companies are fine with having a contractor do those. They must go through the specific authorization, which is the LAPM 14C. Like I said, utility agreements are approved by the district utility coordinator, and the provisions for non-federal utility activities. So, so some of that could be non-federal, not using federal funds. We have special authorizations, of course, for unseen work encountered during construction. So if a item is found, don't want necessarily put a whole halt to the project, but you just need to start working with the district utility coordinator, get approval with what needs to be done. It says here, I'm looking at question, do you use the 13A if landowner is dedicating right of way and no dollar is paid? I believe the answer to that is no. You still have a right of way issue that needs to be documented, and so the 13A does not allow for that documentation to occur. That's a simple answer there. You need to be able to document that, if you want to call it a donation or whatever, would need to be documented. Okay, got one more quiz. And I think, Nicole, I'm looking at this thing here. I'm willing to call it quits for the day because I don't want to, if I go into the next section, it takes me right up to the construction authorization exercise. I don't want to start tomorrow directly with that exercise. So, we'll go. Well, yeah, we'll do that one section. We'll do Psne also. So I changed my mind.
Okay. Well, you're leading the ship.
Yeah. Well, I'm just looking at the clock here, and normally we take a break, and I think what I'll do is just finish this quiz, go through this quiz and the next. And people are answering, what steps must be accomplished before the right-of-way phase can be? And people are slowly answering. Okay, the answer to that is NEPA. You have to have NEPA approved before we can authorize. The certification of the right-of-way is something that occurs after authorization. Design is separate from the design, in the same route classifications, not applicable to right-of-way. Next question. True or false? A right-of-way certification 3 must be elevated to a Cert 2 before advertisement. Got the I knew this one was going to catch people. answer is actually false. It's not before advertisement, it's before bid opening. So that's a trick question there, people. We had it identified incorrectly, but the answer to that is false. It has to be done before bid opening. Next question. Cost of utility location is reimbursable if it is necessary for the project and the agency is liable to pay the cost. And pulling the answer to that is true, absolutely. Like I said, utility, facility, same entity. You still have to go through the process though. Still have to do the investigation and make sure you determine that liability. Next question. The LAPM 13A can be used when land needs to be acquired for the project. Here's the end of that. And the answer is false. That is correct. If there is any property involved, you have to use the 13B, the long form. Next question. Manhole cover adjustments are not a utility relocation. And now a little bit of a trick question. It's kind of a double negative. It's actually false. If you take it and say utility covers are a utility relocation, the answer to that is true, but we put the negative in there, and so it is therefore false. So just to let you know, that's just a little bit of a trick question, throwing you a little double negative in there. All right, we'll go through one more section. I have one more quiz and call it the day because we're approaching, instead of doing a break and calling it the day, we'll just end things. All right. Plan specification to estimate, Psne. Psne, FHA requires construction through competitive bids, and Psne fulfills that requirement. They are a legal contract, agreement between the agency and the contractor. Obligation, it fulfills all the federal obligations, We have a Psne checklist, which identifies where specs can be found, ensuring that all specs are included. And certification, the agency certifies that the Psne meets all federal requirements. So we have the Psne certification, LAPM 13D. Like I said, local agency certifies that the Psne package complies with applicable federal, state, and local laws, including design standards, geometric design exceptions, standard plans, special provisions, federal form 1273 provisions, federal wage rates, non-collusion. Now, federal form 1273 is highlighted there because that is kind of that's what we call the federal boilerplate language. And it is absolutely required that that be included in both in the construction contract and any subcontract involved with the project. And FHWA, I'm trying to think now, it's got to be at least probably 7-8 years ago. They did an audit, and they picked like 50 projects, and they found a perfect 50-0 that the federal form was not in the thing. It was referenced as a supplement to go look at this, and that was not acceptable. It has to be physically incorporated such that the staples through the contract document go through the form 1273 provisions. And then of course the Psne must meet all federal environmental mitigation permit conditions that are incorporated into design. Standard plans and specifications. The state standards can be used on local streets, required on state highways. For local projects, state standards can be used. We refer to the Green Book, or locally approved standards can be used on local projects. I see, pausing for a moment for chat. Somebody posted, is the 14C used even if utilities are funded in construction? The answer to that is yes. Still part of the investigation and right-of-way process. Yes, the 14C is still used. Note to local agencies, make sure you have all non-standard language in utility agreements provided before. Okay, somebody just put in a comment there. Sorry, I took a step back. So standards, if you're dealing with projects on the national highway system, you can, locally approved standards are not acceptable. You must use the AASHTO standards, the Green Book, or state standards. So engineer's estimate, you must identify both participating and non-participating work, broken down in contract items. Agency furnished materials. I've mentioned here that the PIF is required. If the agency furnished materials were acquired following federal procedures, then that'll be acceptable. Identify your contingencies. Break down your construction engineering force account, same type of thing. You have to need to do a PIF. Like I said, it's anticipated that everything is done by contract, but if it's being done by your own source work, you have to justify that it's in the best interest of the public. And proprietary sole source items, same thing, need a PIF. And I mentioned down here in handouts, page 31 through 33, I believe is the PIF. So final design construction methods. Final design, of course, NEPA approval date must be prior to final design, beginning of final design, at least 1 day, or a project could be ineligible for federal funds. You do not want any way, shape, or form to have design kind of dictate the environmental. Construction methods, like I said, typically the preferred method is by contract, or it can be done by force account. It has to be justified. PSNE package. So the PSNE package for construction, it needs to be submitted at the same time, and so includes the checklist, PSNE checklist, LAPM 12D, the PSNE documents, and of course the engineer's cost estimate. So we got another quiz. For all federal aid projects, FHW Form 1273 must be physically incorporated into each executed contract and subcontract. The answer is absolutely true. Failing to incorporate that could lead you to lose your federal funding. Next question. Contractors must pay the higher of either the minimum federal wage rates or the state prevailing wage rates. I didn't get into that very clearly. So we're seeing how well you know federal funding. I'm going to take it easy on you and end the polling now. And the answer is true. It must pay the higher. In California, state prevailing wage rates tend to be higher. One last question. Another one, I've seen how well you know federal aid without my telling you. A non-collusion certification is required for all bidders. And the answer to that is absolutely true. Sorry, I didn't really get into that. These are the type of things that get involved in the day 4, which is dealing with PSNE of this course. So once again, if you want to know more information, Nicole can direct as to when there will be a day 4 of the federal aid series to walk you through, and typically walk through the PSNE checklist and go through that whole process. So with all that said and done, I'm going to end for the day. I'm pulling up the chat thing here. And let's see, I'm looking at, I'm trying to see what. Question here, I think my question was, if an local LAP states that they're liable but not seeking federal reimbursement for utility because they still required all forms, and the answer to that state they're not liable, but are still seeking federal reimbursement for utility relocation. They still need to acquire all forms. They do not need the 14C specific authorization for the utilities because they're not federally participating. But they still, I think they still, other forms will be documented. So I think that answers that question there. Regarding the PIF, letter dated 10/16/19 rescission of patented and proprietary items. Okay, so rescission of patented and proprietary product specific progress regulations. So somebody's looked like they're saying the PIF is not required there. What constitutes final design? Final design is anything that leads to ultimately the I want to say this properly. That if you're doing work that any way, shape, or form that dictates the solution to the project. So your environmental will ultimately tell you what the preferred alternative is. And anything that's a result of that final determination falls under final design. You do not want to do anything, any shape or way that says, oh, that you do some kind of design work that could possibly influence that preferred alternative. So, so final design, it's kind of a little bit vague. Is that what my answer is? So I'm just, it's trying to be a little more succinct about my answer. If not, what I can do is I can take that one and maybe do a little more research and respond to it tomorrow. What if there's a franchise agreement and the utility company is not seeking federal reimbursement for utility? There's a franchise agreement and the utility company is not seeking federal reimbursement for the utility relocation. It's still covered, it's still identified on the short form. It'll still be identified on there. Just list, if I'm assuming that it's going to be part of the construction contract, and therefore it would be identified as non-participating, and that it would be paid for with non-federal funds. Things are jumping too fast. Franchise agreements would be 100% liability for the costs on owner. Okay, somebody responded to that. So we don't have to do the long form. The answer to that, correct. The long form is not needed. Like I said, for utilities, the utilities are identified on the short form. And if, like I said, if it's such that identifies whether it's being participating or non-participating. If it's federally participating, yes, you do the 14C. If it's not, you do not need to submit the 14C. Unless it's only utility. People are answering questions for me too. I think that. Are there any further questions?
Okay.
So tomorrow we will start up with a construction authorization exercise. It'll be similar to what we did on that PE exercise. It'll be continuation of that same project. That's what we'll start up with. I'm pretty sure that we will finish early tomorrow also. So if you work your schedules, so you, I'm just looking to see here. Yeah, I think it'll be a little bit shorter. It's like I said, this is the first time I've taught this through Zoom. I hope you're obtaining the information, and that so tomorrow, like I said, if you have any questions, what we'll do is I think Nicole will kind of go through the questions. If you don't feel your question was answered, please retype it, and we'll address those questions first thing tomorrow. I'll try to give a better answer to what you define as final final design. Let's see if I can actually give you a source. Give you a textbook answer. And somebody knows I'm a Packer fan. I'm not sure who I am. I am a Packer fan. And so there must be something in the background. Yeah, I do have a Packer item in the background. So thank you. So that's it for now. I appreciate it. And I'm gonna hang on. I'm going to hang on for a little bit as people log out. So I will.
Before anyone logs out, I am going to share an evaluation link for everyone to complete today. And so this would also be a great place for you to add any questions or information that you would like us to cover, or if you want to call attention to something that we didn't cover that was brought up in chat. I know Peter did a really great job making sure to answer everyone's questions, but this will be a great alternative to catch those. And I did pull all the questions from chat, and I will give those to Peter, and we'll work on providing everyone with written answers. So we have documentation for that. And we'll do that for both days. So yes, sorry to cut you off there, Peter. I just wanted to catch anyone before they logged off so we could get them to fill that evaluation.
No, not a problem.
Great. And I will email that as well with the documents today. So thank you. And we'll just stay on, and unless anyone has any questions, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your time.
There is a thing from Linda Vale. I have a scenario. If she wants to unmute and ask me her question right now, go ahead, Linda.
Let's see. Oh, unmute.
Is Linda Vale out there?
Hello? Hello, hello?
Oh, go ahead. I just see Linda Vale, so
yeah.
Your name is truncated. Sorry.
Yes, that's okay. I have a question regarding a project that I worked on that had an option to purchase in place prior to their seeking the federal reimbursement. And the option to purchase, part of it was completed because it was an exchange of property by the city to this private entity, and it was for their development. And that portion of it was completed. It was an easement that was granted to the city, and it was for an exchange. Okay. Then the second portion of it was part of that option to purchase as well, but it was not completed. They never executed the documents. They never recorded the deeds. And there's federal funding involved. It's an on-system project right next to the highway. And we were told that they could go ahead and do that without following our guidelines, because it was a prior option to purchase. And that really, really concerned me, because there are federal funds in the project, but supposedly because it was a project that was done prior, or an option to purchase that was executed prior, even though they're still having to acquire that property, that it's a separate, and they're using their own funding, local funds. So.
Like I said, I'm going to try to summarize this a little bit. Might just have to say this is a question for district right away, because you're getting in an area that's a little bit out of my expertise. You're getting a little more detail than I'm real comfortable with, but let me see if I capture it correctly. So there was an option to purchase a piece of property that's needed for the project.
Yes.
And they did not execute it.
They didn't complete it. No, they executed the document. They didn't complete the transaction.
So they never acquired that parcel.
No, but they wrote up in the option of purchase, they had an appraisal drawn up to allocate funds for another certain amount of years, or it projected the value of what it would be prior to the deadline of when they were given to purchase the property and the option to purchase. And so that's what they're using. And it really concerned me because there is federal funding involved in the project, but I guess I was told because it was an option of purchase that was executed prior to, and they're using local funds, not federal funds, that they could follow through with that.
You know, like I said, I'm not gonna be an expert on this area, so I really would like to defer getting into the specifics and whether that's right or wrong with a district right-of-way person. So I'm not sure which district you work with, but I would make a point of talking this scenario over with district staff, particularly somebody in the right-of-way office, because like I said, it's just a little bit outside of my expertise.
Yeah.
And so that's why I say, you know, typically this federal aid series has a right-of-way component. And so, like I said, I don't know if they have a right-of-way course scheduled in the near future. So, but like I said, yeah, that's just not my expertise.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I don't know if there's anybody else still out there who wants to chat a question.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So you were talking about the adjustments for the utilities and how that would be on the 13A, right? So for an adjustment form?
Yes.
Okay. So if in our adjustments, East Bay Med also includes,
Nope.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's
somebody else needs to mute.
Okay. So they also include changing out their canisters. So it's included in their adjustment. So it's the cost goes up. That was my point, really, is if we don't change out their canisters, which they want to upgrade to, the cost stays the same for the contractor, but the cost goes up with the contractor once we include that canister with the bids. So I'm wondering if we'd be able to include that with in the 13B. Does that make sense?
Well, you're getting into an area that I do a little. They're asking for an upgrade in the utility, a betterment, that would not be federally eligible. They can do it, it just would not be federally reimbursable. So if they're, you know, if we're relocating a water line, you know, let's say it's a 6-inch water line and they say, hey, we want to make that an 8-inch water line. Well, yes, they can do it, but it just, we would only have to somehow segregate it out to say, okay, this percentage of the cost, that water line would not be eligible. So if they're asking for something that is classified as a betterment,
I understand.
that would not be federally eligible.
Oh, thanks.
You
Thanks.
could,
That's helpful.
equivalent item would be eligible, so that betterment would just have to be classified as non-participating.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
You're welcome. Anybody else want to ask a question? If somebody posted a question, if a local grant is awarded for a federal project, how would that be reflected in the 3A form as STIP? Can the local grant be used as funds for a local match? The local grant is awarded for a federal project. The local grant, I'm assuming when they say a local grant, meaning local funds, yes, it would show up as on the 3A as under non-federal funds. Looking for, pardon me for a second, I got a copy of a 3A. So typically that would just be shown under local match funds. That would cover that. So you know, if you have a project that has STIP funds and those STIP funds are allocated state only and it's serving as a match, yes, those can be put on there. They would be shown as a state match under the state match column. We just have to make sure that that allocation occurs prior to the authorization. So yeah, so the 3A has 3 non-federal. It has state, local, other. Other would be kind of like if we're talking about a utility company and the utility is ultimately going to pay for it, you put it under other, that it's ultimate, you're going to cover the costs, the local agent's going to cover the costs, and you're going to get reimbursed by somebody else other than Federal Highway Administration or the state in that case. So that's kind of how you'd use other. Oh, somebody put, I think I meant FTIP, not STIP. Local grant is awarded, but how would that be reflected? Yeah, so that still doesn't change. A local grant is, like I said, treated as local funds. And like I said, it could be shown under local or other. Like I said, if you're seeking reimbursement, you're going to process some kind of invoice to whoever submitted that grant, that you'd be reimbursed through them. That would be shown that way. Okay. Anybody else out there have burning questions? I'm going to stop sharing. Still a lot of people online.
I think they're just sticking around to see if anything, I don't miss anything.
Yeah, no. Give me a thumbs up if you got all your questions answered. Okay.